So we need to make sure that we have other industries and other segments of the economy that are very robust and that can, we can turn the lights on rather quickly and scale them up if we need to, if the financial services industry is ever under any sort of duress.
And why is it important to have the talent in the country?
So when you have the talent in the country, basically what we're doing is we're getting the capital into the country. One thing that's super important for many people to understand is that Luxembourg, the living standard we have today, is because of the capital inflows from all of these, financial services industries, all of the companies that are exporting things. That's where we get capital inflows. What does that mean? For example, if I have a company in Luxembourg and I'm exporting steel, let's say, to the US, they're going to pay me in Luxembourg. That's going to hit my company bank account in Luxembourg. What then happens is at the end of the year, I will pay taxes. But those taxes, that money that the government then gets, that government revenue, has come from abroad. Whereas, for example, government officials here in Luxembourg, also great, fantastic for the system, but that money has been issued by the government and now is being paid back to the government. So we're not really growing the pie. And that's why having that talent here and then obviously attracting those services or being able to offer a diversity of services that you cannot if you do not have the expertise or talent will lead to more capital inflows from abroad and hopefully continue growing the pie that we need to sustain our economy in Luxembourg.
And so if you were working in the Ministry of Finance here in Luxembourg, what changes would you implement today?
I think for me, I was really, really happy in January when I saw that I know a lot of people that are already here, they said, well, what about me? Can I not get the 50% tax cut? But I was really happy because it signaled to me that they knew what they were doing. And I think that's actually one of the things.
They knew there was a problem.
Exactly. They knew there was a problem. And I think to me, it signaled that they know, and I think in our world today, I need to give credit to our government because there's a lot of governments around the world where you ask, what are we doing? What is your reasoning behind it? Whereas in Luxembourg, mostly from what I've seen, I can still see what they're thinking. Again, small country, you have a lot of politicians that are on social media, that are out in the streets at different festivals. You can speak to them pretty openly.
You're probably related to one or two.
Yeah, probably related to one or two. And I think that's the first thing. I would have absolutely done something to make it easier for talent to come into the country. And tax cuts is great. I think what is Dubai doing? Dubai is not going to be, and I had a really interesting conversation about this too as well. Dubai is not going to remain tax-free forever. They're doing this to attract the talent. And we need to do similar things in order to remain competitive, especially in certain industries, AI. And then the other thing that you need to do is you need to make it super easy for startups to start here. It was a lot easier a few years ago. I was having a good conversation with my accountant during Luxembourg Blockchain Week about this. A few years ago, it was a lot easier to start a startup in Luxembourg. It didn't take 3 to 6 months to get all the approvals, all the licenses, get your bank account started. And
so what has changed? I mean, that's an unusual flip. Normally, things become more efficient with time. So what went wrong?
So in 2015, Luxembourg faced a lot of pressure from the OECD and other big public financial institutions to basically lift the veil because we had the banking secrecy still at that point in time. That no longer exists as such in Luxembourg. And so what we did then instead was we made sure that we were the best on compliance or regulation to fortify that. And that has worked to an extent. But the problem that you see a lot with regulation and compliance is that inevitably you are going to suffocate some innovation. I was just at the PwC Crypto Asset Management Summit, and one of the key points that was made there, 2 key points, was in Luxembourg, we need to make sure that we don't just sit back and do nothing. That's the biggest risk. And I thought that was really interesting to discuss that. No, the biggest risk is not AI taking over Luxembourg and taking all the systems. No. The worst risk is doing nothing because the move's moving too quickly and we're going to get left behind. And then the other thing that we talked about is in Luxembourg, we celebrate very quickly. We're the first to regulate or in Europe in general. We're the first to regulate AI. We're the first to regulate crypto assets with MiCA, which is great in that sense. But
these are like handcuffs on innovation.
exactly. And the US doesn't do that. If I studied in the US, if I was in the US, I could start an LLC in a few days to a few hours. It's that quickly. And I know even for myself now, for me, it wasn't too much of a problem, but I'm doing research into digital assets at Cambridge. It wasn't favorably looked upon by banks. And I know Laurent Mozart, he posts a lot about that on LinkedIn as well, where the banking industry, yes, we are AAA rated and we need to maintain that credibility, but we can't just say no to fintechs and any sort of emerging market startup. No, you're not going to get a bank account because we don't understand what you're doing or what your activities are, or because some actors in some other countries in that segment of the economy are scammers.
So the finfluencers, like yourself with the knowledge, it's a new word of the week. You're going to just jump across all of those old banking systems and thoughts. So if you were, let's just put it to one side for the moment, if you were an entrepreneur today and you've spoken about some places where it's easy to set up, Dubai, America, where would you set up a business?
I think there's so many factors that go into it. If I was single and I could go anywhere in the world and I wasn't a big family person, I would definitely be in Dubai. Because for me, my interests lie in crypto assets and digital assets, digital marketing, areas like that, but also AI. And if you got let's say a 30% raise in your salary tomorrow, inevitably that would be a pretty big bump, and that's what you are basically getting when you go to Dubai, and you're paying barely any taxes, corporate taxes, and no income taxes. So the money goes further in that sense. You have a big leg up on your competition, especially because now in a market you can potentially offer services at a price that no one else can, because they need to pay taxes and they have higher costs. Whereas I know I don't have that 30-40% tax cost, so I can produce there. I also still think the US is still very strong, because in the US, and this is a big difference between the US and Europe, what I have seen, even though I think it's getting better. In the US, if I come to you, you have your own company, I have my own company, the conversation always starts from, yes, let's collaborate, how? Whereas in Europe, it tends to be, I don't know if this is going to work. I don't know if, if this mutually beneficial. Let me give it to my risk management team. Let me take a look at this for a few months, and then you never hear back or whatever. And I think the speed of movement in the US and the willingness to go out there and fail, I think is it's a very different mentality, and it suits business very well. In the US, if you go bankrupt, people don't think of you as this person that's failed in life. A lot of business people have gone bankrupt and become billionaires in the US. Whereas I know in Luxembourg, because we are more risk averse, it's all throughout our culture. I'm Luxembourgish, but I know a lot of people, and there's nothing wrong with going to work for the government. It's great, but we also need people in the private sector, as I said before, to get people into
the private sector pay their wages.
Exactly. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you mentioned the US. We know about tariffs at the moment. We've learned a lot about tariffs, and we've learned a lot about national debt. What is the national debt of Luxembourg?
So I don't know the exact figures of the national debt, but I do know we are in pretty good standing compared to the rest of the EU. But I think what's really, really important to understand is, how do we pay back national debt? Well, there's really, 3 ways that we could do it. The first is tax revenue. So when we tax our citizens, okay, we can now pay back that government debt. The second way.
And how much of our tax is going towards paying that back?
I think it's around 3-4% in Luxembourg, or in Europe in general. That's the average. It's a lot higher in the US, where especially those interest payments on the debt are big. The second way that we can pay it back is by refinancing that debt, or rolling it over, as you would say, in the sense where we talked about government bonds before. We just issue more government bonds. Right, so we get more people to buy those government bonds, we get more money in, and we pay off the other loans. You can think of it as this way, probably a little bit more popular in the US. not great, but if you have credit card debt, you get a new credit card to pay off the first credit card. And then you just now have the debt on the second credit card.
You're just passing the problem down the line through the generations.
Yes, absolutely. And so that's the second way. And then the third way is by what we call quantitative easing, which is pretty much where the central bank will come in and buy those bonds and issue liquidity into the system that way. But you can see how we need to be careful with those incentives there, because the government and the central banks are not, they are linked in a certain way. And there are incentives there that could be misaligned. So we just need to be careful with that as a society.
Right. There's an awful lot of trust we have as citizens in all of these institutions. So let's bypass all of these institutions. Let's move into the whole crypto world, the thing that you love and the world that you work in. So I want to move into digital assets without your jargon. I know you're a total expert in it.
Absolutely.
So let's start with Bitcoin. I think most of us know. Most people, everybody's heard of Bitcoin. Some people will, I would say perhaps still over 50% would be frightened about using it or buying it.